Hola, mi nombre es Andrés Gómez, soy profesor de piano de la Universidad de AFIT. Quiero darles la bienvenida hoy a una entrevista muy especial con la maestra Rebecca Penneys. Ella fue mi profesora de doctorado, profesora emérita de la Eastman School of Music, de la prestigiosa Eastman School of Music, y quien tiene ahora un festival que es el RPPF, Rebecca Penneys Piano Festival, que les recomiendo que vayan a ver, y si son pianistas, les recomiendo que se presenten para ir. Es un festival de varios días con excelentes profesores de todo Estados Unidos y de todo el mundo, en donde van a aprender. Es un intensivo de piano. Eh, Voy a cambiar ahora a inglés, pero estén pendientes de cómo cambiar los subtítulos, que lo pueden hacer con los ajustes de YouTube, para que puedan entender en caso de que no hablen inglés. Si tienen preguntas sobre la entrevista, por favor me comentan y yo puedo hacer de pronto algún videito explicando algunos de los aspectos de los que hablamos hoy. Y bueno, ya voy a cambiar a inglés. Hello everybody, my name is Andrés Gómez. I am a piano professor at the EAFIT University in Medellin, Colombia. And today I want to welcome you to a very, very special interview with pianist Professor Rebecca Penneys from the Eastman School of Music. She is Professor Emérita from Eastman School of Music, and now she has a festival, the RPPF, Rebecca Penneys Piano Festival, in Tampa, Florida. A phenomenal festival that I can assure you that you won't be wasting your time if you go there, with wonderful faculty, and you'll get firsthand knowledge from her. And she's my professor from my doctoral studies. She was also my master's teacher's professor or my undergrad teacher's professor, so she is very much related to me in many ways. Plus, she's been a wonderful mentor through all these years. Hello, Rebecca, Ms. Penneys, and
Hello.
welcome to the interview today.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you so much for doing this in English, because if you don't do it in English, we can't have an interview.
And I'll have the subtitles so people in Spanish can also follow the conversation.
Great.
So I want to do the interview. We talked about doing it in kind of two parts. So the first part will be more about you, your teachers, and your legacy. And the second part will focus more on Chopin etudes and the technique of modern piano through Chopin and Liszt and all these things. So I wanted to start with asking you about the beginning, back in LA when you were a little girl, and how was it that you started playing the piano?
Well, I actually don't remember when I started playing the piano, because I started playing the piano so early. Apparently, so the story goes, my parents, who neither of whom can carry a tune, by the way, noticed that I used to sing and dance, and when I was 2, I was dancing all over the house and breaking lamps, and so they knew they needed to do something. My uncle, who had gone to Curtis, was given at that time in the 30s a beautiful Steinway A, and that was in our house. And I just remember always playing the piano. And of course, my brother studied. He was the older child, and I would go with my mother to his lessons, because I had to go everywhere that she went. And then we would leave the lesson, and I would play everything that he was assigned by ear. So his piano lesson days didn't last very long. He didn't like that. So I got lessons, and my very first piano teacher was a woman, lovely woman, but she had an enormous thumb, and I was afraid to play the piano because I thought that my thumb would grow and it would become like hers. And I insisted that my mother find another piano teacher, which she did. The next piano teacher, she was a student of Bartók, and I studied with her for a few years. She played me every recording that Bartók ever made, and I was just blessed to hear all of that, and his music too. that didn't last too long because she always taught me with her dog on her lap, this smelly dachshund. But she did teach me how to sight read. She did teach me, you know, basic things. And I think my love of gardening came from her because she had a beautiful little garden. Anyway, my main mentor in California was Abby Serko, who was one of Schnabel's assistants. I'm not sure if Schnabel really had you know, Leonard Schur was another one, but in any case, I studied with Abby for from 11 until I went to the Chopin competition when I was 17, and I also studied with Leonard Stein, who was Schoenberg's assistant, and he was like Mr. Music Master. I mean, I learned theory and composition and everything you needed to know, really. So I had these two very, very strong teachers, and then I went to Indiana University. I studied with George Showak, who had a profound effect, and Janos Starker too. And they really helped me sort of focus on this path of what is the best way to play the piano, so with maximum efficiency and maximum expression with minimum physical exertion. So I have to say, just in parentheses, that I was trained very, very well as a dancer also, and actually I wanted to be a dancer. That's a whole other story. We won't go there because it was a huge issue in the family. But my parents wanted me to be a pianist. And my dance training was much better than my piano training, and I knew that I was in physical trouble even before I went to Warsaw. And I knew I would never be able to have a concert career or play and be comfortable unless I found another solution. And my solution was to give up the piano and become a professional dancer after winning the prize in the Chopin competition. So I went to San Francisco, and that's what I did for 2.5 years. But then I thought, no, I really don't want to be a dancer. I really should learn how to dance at the piano. And so my then boyfriend had just accepted a position in the Indianapolis Symphony, and out we went to Bloomington. And I only had heard Shubak on recording with Starker, and he sounded like he was effortless. Anyway, I just appeared in his studio door. And yeah, I played for him, I played for Starker, and then I was back practicing the piano. And what I loved about them is that they had solved so many physical issues, and they had delved, both of them, so deeply into this idea. Well, this was the Liszt, really from the Liszt tradition of playing the piano. But, you know, since we don't really know how Chopin looked and we don't know how Liszt looked, we can imagine, and we do read, and we discover things. So my whole life has been about sitting down at the piano and having a party, I guess is a good way to put it. I mean, I feel like I'm having a massage. I love it. I feel very comfortable. And this is what I've spent my life teaching, because a lot of people get stuck along the way, not because of their talent, but they can't get their talent out. So, you know, by now I've done so much of this that just in thinking about what I would say about Chopin and Chopin etudes or Liszt, whatever, it's like, you know, trying to remember specific lessons with my teachers. For instance, I also studied with Rosina Levine at Aspen. I don't remember much about anybody's lessons, but I can tell you one thing, that every great teacher talks about sound, because sound is the carrier of emotion. And Abby had the most incredible sound, as did Rosina Levine, as did Shubak, you know, because there's so many different kinds of beautiful. So of course that was true of Chopin, because that's what you read over and over again about Chopin and about Liszt, the beauty of the sound. So I call that really the voice of the piano. So here I am, and it's a gigantic subject. I've spent over 50 years roaming around this subject, so we can talk about any aspect of it that you like.
Okay, well, before we go into that, I want to delve a little bit into the tradition of Mr. Cerco and Mr. Shebok, because you mentioned that Cerco was a student of Schnabel, and Schnabel was a student of Lechitiski, who was a student of Czerny.
Right.
Or,
And
so,
Beethoven. So
and
it goes
Beethoven.
back to Beethoven. But
So there's a very short lineage from there to Beethoven.
Right, and Shebok, of course, goes back to Liszt.
Mm-hmm.
So
Who-
I mean,
Do you know who Shebok started with, and who? Because I remember listening to a master class of
do,
Shebok saying
exactly.
that he heard somebody said he heard somebody that Liszt had said something, but who did he study with?
It's not, actually, my lineage is on my website, and we can just go and look it up. But it's not. When I used to ask Shebok who he studied with, he said nobody. And I said, you can't say nobody. And he said, well, I didn't learn anything from anybody. I said, but that can't be true. So, I mean, that was his attitude. But he was very, directly, I mean, when he was in Budapest, he had classes with Dochnányi, Bartók, and Kodály. So that goes directly back to Liszt. The only problem with this is that, and he also studied with Leo Weiner.
Okay.
He considered Leo Weiner, who was primarily a composer, but Leo Weiner has a wonderful edition of the Beethoven sonatas and a wonderful. He wrote 2 wonderful violin and piano sonatas, by the way. He was a wonderful composer, but his forte was teaching, and I think Shebok gave him the most credit. But when I asked him, where did you learn how to play scales and arpeggios, all that blank? And I don't know, I've asked that question to a lot of other Shebok students.
Mm-hmm.
So I looked it up one day on the internet, and if you look at the lineage page, we can see who that is.
Okay.
And it was by a process of elimination who was at the conservatory teaching.
Did Shebok have any? I mean, I know he has, but did he have any special methods for scales? Did you talk about scales with him in Indiana, or were you just so beyond that they didn't even touch the basics with you?
Well, first of all, let me just say just clearly that Cerco, Cerco didn't exactly teach technique, but he did teach some technique.
Mm-hmm.
Like he believed in the Brahms 51 exercises, and it was a rather like that kind of technique.
Okay.
Cerco never played concerts, and I think the reason was he got so nervous he couldn't play. But he would play 8 bars or 16 bars, and those bars were really terrific. So my image of him is that he wasn't terribly well trained. Technically he could play. I mean, he has one recording, and it's wonderful, by the way. You can look it up on Amazon. So Shebok had obviously thought a tremendous amount about how to play everything, and so we did talk about. It wasn't his way, but it was a way of, this is how Liszt would have done it, or this is how I think Chopin would have done it. So it was just my cup of tea, and it had all, it was always having to do with remaining in motion, remaining flexible, and exploring different options.
Mm-hmm.
He was just very open, and he was constantly changing himself. He was on his own path of discovery. And I think that's, one of the things that you really want to do with the student. You don't want to give them a method. You want to give them, sort of help them get into a state of awareness, a state of balance at the piano, where they can use various principles and keep developing on their own. Because if you, I mean, what Shabak would say is that if you have a closed circle, a method, you're going to be frozen. So
True.
you can have
I
interlocking
can see
circles that move around, but you have to be in motion, so you have to be flexible.